Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a new season of Beyond the Box, a podcast where we talk about what's shaping global trade and logistics. I'm Nicole Elam, and I'll be one of your hosts today.
Thanks, Nicole. And I'm your other host, Phil Lewin. There's a lot going on in the world today with supply chains. So, this season of Beyond the Box, we're going to be focusing on resilience.
So, today we're discussing how new laws and regulations are impacting supply chains. And to do this, we've gone to the experts. First, we have Janet Labuda, head of customs and trade issues at Maersk Customs Services in North America. Welcome, Janet.
Great to be here today, and thank you very much.
Yes, welcome. And we're also very happy to be joined by our own Lars Karlsson, who's the global head of trade and customs consulting for Global Customs Services at Maersk. I know that's a mouthful, but Lars, it's great to have you here too.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to be here and to talk about these things. And of course, customs is always the most important that we can talk about. And for the moment, it's all over the news. So great to be here.
All right, so let's get started. This question is for both of you, but it's a bit of a mouthful. Global supply chains have evolved to be very efficient over the past decade or so, and it looks like we're entering a changing landscape in global trade with regards to tariffs and other regulations. Is there a risk that supply chains will be rewired in ways that reduce their efficiency, and how can companies avoid this?
Yes, absolutely. I can surely say that is about to happen because the tariff is here to stay. Is something that we will see for the years to come, and the same goes for new regulations, specifically the supply chain multi-tier type of regulations that we've seen recently, and they're more on the way. So environmental, social protection, and governance regulations that will be in place, and those will have an impact. So it's important for companies to actually stay agile on this, to make sure you have insights on what is going on, and then to have a customs strategy. Make sure you have an updated customs and tariff planning strategy so you can actually make sure that you are doing the right things, because there will be a lot of changes for the years to come.
Yeah, and I want to add to this. Thanks, Lars. Based on my experience, which was 31 years with U.S. Customs and Border Protection, there's a lot of advice we can give, but up front, I want to say immediately that companies need to enhance all of their internal and external partnerships. We have to weather these storms together. We can't do it alone. And compliance departments are the linchpin for protecting brand and, frankly, a corporate financial structure. They must focus on keeping up with all the moving pieces. There's no doubt that the supply chains are going to be rewired. But frankly, I think a lot of things have happened over the last decade that have put supply chains, a great deal of pressure on supply chains. So we see new regulations and laws like the forced labor laws in the US and the EU. We see sanctions that have been put on. We've seen anti-dumping countervailing duties. We've seen national security from the U.S. perspective, 232 duties. There have been free trade agreements, trade preference programs. And frankly, I don't think supply chains have been as static and as stable as we think they are. Now, obviously, there's some industries that are going to have to rewire, no pun intended, like the auto industry. That's always been fairly stable. And there's some industries that you can't do anything about with regard to the supply chain. For example, critical minerals. So I think there's been a lot of pressure that had been put on supply chains, like I said, over the last decade. But I think there's things that companies need to do in order to be nimble, to look at alternatives in supplies. How do they weather these black swan events, so to speak? And I think that, one of the things is you have to start discussing options and various scenarios, and you really have to partner with companies that are going to help you reach that next level.
I think there is very valuable advice, Janet, and I totally agree. I think that trade compliance has now become the license to play, and people need to step up, and we need to do that as well, all of us working together in partnerships. as you said. It's really important to choose your right partners to get those type of insights and possibilities to foresee this, but also to look for solutions that is multi-regulation handling and multi-market handling. So it's actually possible to rewire those supply chains and make them more efficient, because I think we need to do that for the time to come, because again, it will not be less complex or less complicated in the near time. But again, there's also great opportunities there, because those who are early movers and actually step up on trade compliance and work together with other partners in the supply chain have also an opportunity to actually be better in the future, and by that, getting more resilience and more predictability.
I certainly agree, Lars. There also needs to be a mechanism in place to bring the logistics, sourcing, and compliance people together. So often the compliance people say, we don't have a seat at the table, and that has to change. And, really, again, as I say, they are the linchpin as we go through this turmoil that we're going through right now. One of the things that we have to look at is, who's your customs broker? From my own experience in customs, whenever we have changes to the regulatory landscape or the tariff landscape, it is critical that your broker keeps up with all these changes and works with their partners. It's a force multiplier, which companies need.
Thank you, Janet. And actually, I know one of the big pressure points that companies are really struggling with are the huge amounts of data that you need for trade compliance, reporting regulations, all the ESG things that Lars mentioned, and probably even more on the horizon. And I know that's a burden for a lot of companies. They're not sure where to get started. But is there also a way to turn these around into advantage, to take advantage of all this compliance data that we have anyhow, and use that, for example, to improve supply chain visibility or performance for your customers?
Oh, by all means. I mean, data and information is critical. But the one thing we have to keep in mind is data and information often is very expensive. And many times, people that are importing, companies that are importing, don't have access to the data. And I could tell you, even when I was at customs, they very often didn't have access to the full landscape of data that was going on. And now we have a different dynamic. We have the ability to get more data, and using the artificial intelligence and machine learning dynamic. There's three parts to it as far as I'm concerned. The ability to access as much data as possible, the ability to analyze that data, not only from a risk perspective, but as you're building your business model. And then certainly the third part is having robust algorithms for machine learning so that it assists you in making the decisions from a strategic perspective. And so most companies don't have that. And that's why when I talk about partnering with third parties, I think that's critical. And even the government is doing the same thing. If we look at US Customs, for example, they are partnering with a number of AI providers, and not only partnering from the perspective of data, but also using that ability to analyze, and how does that data really affect me? Could it affect me? And how do I need to change my strategic plan going forward?
Oh, I totally agree on that. Data is the key here. And as Janet said, organizations, traders need to own their own data. You need to get access to and own your customs data in the future, because it's literally a currency. It is gold in the bank, and you need to have access to it. Then, as said, there are great opportunities today to actually manage data differently. Many does that, and we are seeing an acceleration of the trade digitalization side to get data accessible. Where we're doing that, we can also see how we can utilize data to actually create these type of passports for goods, trust badges of data for clients that is actually the compliance records that then will be acknowledged by border agencies. And to do that, that is one way to actually get ahead of the curve, and companies need to stay ahead of the curve here. those who are early movers, as I said before, will be the winners going forward. But it's extremely important to stay agile with this, to make sure you have your data, to manage it properly. As Janet said, to get a partner that can help you out with the competencies, social systems, and various type of capacities you don't have on your own. And then make sure it's as well that is data that is used and reused and that is compliant through the supply chain and value chains, because that is the only way in the future to actually have agility, resilience, and predictability through borders. And by that, lower cost, by that, lower carbon emissions, and many other things.
If you look at a lot of the new regulatory requirements, forced labor, things, the tariffs, things like that, one of the key things that threads through the entire global structure is the fact that regulators are saying you have to know what's going on in your supply chain at all levels. Who's in the chain and what are they doing in that chain? And for many importers, they may know the first partner in their chain. They may go down to the second level. But usually after that, they're not going back to, for example, the field where the cotton is grown or the mine where the critical mineral is being extracted. And they don't have the ability to look into their chain completely. Somebody made a comment to me yesterday that, they really don't know how their products are being made or how much product is going into something. For example, if you look at the new tariffs in steel and aluminum, how much steel is in a keychain or in a hammer, for example? Artificial intelligence allows you to understand what's going on in every level of your supply chain. So it, what I call, pierces the veil of the supply chain and gives you insights. And in doing that, it allows you to also determine if you have any risk inherent in that supply chain. More and more regulators, governments, laws are requiring importers to understand what's happening in the chain. And I think this type of data is the only way that this can be done.
I think that is a great point, Janet. I think that we also see that these type of regulations, and like you, I've been around for 40 years in customs now, both on international institutions, on government side, and of course, the last decade on private sector side. We can see that this is a change. It's a shift, right? So these are supply chain regulations, and they can only be handled by companies that actually can handle this and help their also suppliers and contractors and service providers to be in compliance with these new type of rules. But again, AI data is the key here. But let's also remember that artificial intelligence, this is not for the future for trade or for customs today. It's already there, as you mentioned before. Government agencies are using it. Customs administration and border agencies are using it today. We and many others are using it as well. And the important thing to remember, obviously, is that you also need to make sure that partner network is there, as we mentioned several times. Because again, machine learning, it's only as good as it's taught. It's only as good as we train it. And that means that these two components are there in a hybrid model already and will become better and better. And it's the way to handle this. And the solutions are out there already. So don't sit and wait and be worried for what will happen next year or next year after. You need to proactively go out there and look at how you can be in charge of your own supply chain in a better way using these new, not only technologies, but also different type of models we have in place for resilience, predictability, speed, various kinds of trade facilitation measures that are linked to these compliance and security measures. And this is where governments are going. This is where trade is going.
One of the things I want to say is a number of our clients will come to me and they're saying they're attempting to really look into their supply chains using manual modes. So they go out to the various suppliers, supply chain level 1. Supply chain level 1 goes out to supply chain level 2, and they ask a series of questions. Well, often I ask, how are you validating that information? And they look at me and they go, we don't. Okay. And that is a tremendous vulnerability for the client. Okay. Number one. Number two, so many things are happening so quickly with tariffs, new laws, forced labor, shifts in supply chain, that you must be in a situation where you can be flexible and nimble and pivot as the changes occur. If you do something in a manual mode, what's going to happen is an hour after it's done, it becomes obsolete. So the ability to use this type of data to be able to analyze it, move it very quickly through the process, gives you a tremendous benefit across the board.
And I want to go back to a theme that we've been talking about here for a few minutes, and that's really the uncertainty surrounding all of the geopolitical events happening right now. And if we can put kind of a finer point on it, how do companies begin to do longer term supply chain forecasting to realize their growth ambitions?
Well, it's about supply chain visibility. It is about having trade compliance excellence. It's about having your own data available and using it. And then again, the right partners, and vet the right partners as well. As you get partners who have solutions that is, again, as I said before, multi regulations, for multi markets, that can be configured to the pattern you have in your company, your production pattern, your sales pattern, and of course your journey through the market to the end consumer. And that is possible to do. It's just much more valid and much more important to do it right now because of the agility we need to have. And my message is really clear here on this, and I'm sure Janet agree with me. This is not something that will go away. This is something we've seen coming over the years behind us. It's accelerating right now. It will be accelerating for the time to come. And it's better being ready now and not wait for solutions that will come later. You need to invest in this. You need to talk to the right partners. You need to have the networks to make it happen. And companies can do that. We know how to do this. And those who do it well are the ones that is, again, early adopting to the new environment. And they also have new opportunities. They will do better business and more business.
Yes, and I think what's also important is the fact that as these changes come, you really have to have a group that looks at, how are these changes affecting my company? Am I being affected by these? Do I deal in this particular product area? Am I dealing with this particular country? How can I shift to look at other, as Lars has said. So how can I make use of some of the things that are available to me? But the first thing you have to do is really a quick impact study with regard to your supply chain, your product production, and obviously, where you're getting those products from. No, one of the things I was going to say is, Lars is very correct when we talk about the use of free trade agreements. They're really underutilized. And one of the reasons from the US perspective that they're underutilized is the amount of documentation that's needed to prove that you meet the rules of origin. And one of the things I would like to see, and I'm encouraging customs to do this, is really look at the new technologies and the AI to help with validating and verifying free trade preference so that we're not in this document exercise. And I've seen any number of situations where documents have been counterfeited, created to meet the requirement when in fact they are not the correct documents. And I think we need to look at technology to bring us to the next level.
There's a lot of uncertainty in the world right now, but there's also a lot of resilience in the industry. And what is the one thing that our audience should keep in mind for the future? We'll start with you, Janet.
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. One of the things I'd like them to keep in mind is the fact that, when we talk about resilient supply chains, we also have to talk about supply chains that are not in violation of anything. And in this situation with things changing so quickly, you're going to have people that are going to try to circumvent the process. And I've seen in my experience when I was in customs for 31 years, corporate identity theft, counterfeiting of documents and invoices, double and triple invoicing schemes, and especially illegal transshipment. So people have to be very, very aware, not only of their supply chain in a static type of sense, but as it really moves and grows and changes, that when somebody says we're shifting our production someplace else, that they really are ensuring that the goods are from that other country that might not be affected by these various new regulations and sanctions and things of that nature. And again, using an ethical broker is going to be important. You don't want government enforcement actions to disrupt the chain. There's nothing worse than having an empty shelf when you're trying to sell a product. There's nothing worse than being hit with monetary penalties, expending man hours, being audited, etc. You want to insulate yourself from that situation.
No, it's a great question, obviously, and the one we need to ask ourselves every day. I would say that trade compliance is now a possibility, an opportunity. Uh, Companies need to look at this in a very serious way, but see it as an opportunity as well, because there is a lot of things to be optimistic about as well. Because we do know for a fact that crisis of various kinds drives development, it drives acceleration. We see trade digitalization happening much faster now than I've seen in my 40 years in the business. And this is helping us. There are solutions there. And we talked all through, and Janet has mentioned many times, artificial intelligence and machine learning. These type of new technologies are already available. It's really about the data. It's back to the data. And for any company working with this international trade, make sure that you have the right partners to manage your data correctly. If you do that, you will be compliant, as Janis was talking about. You will avoid the risks that are there of being on the first page of unintentionally violating some of the regulations. There's an upside to this as well. Be proactive, stay ahead of the curve.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Lars. And that's a very optimistic note to end on. So this ends today's episode of Beyond the Box, but I have a feeling this is a conversation that we're going to be having all year, and we're just getting started.
That's so true. And really, many thanks to our guests, Janet Labuda and Lars Karlsson, for joining us and sharing their insights today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Customs has never been more important than now, but it will be more important tomorrow.
That's right. And please stay tuned for the next episode. We're going to continue talking about supply chain resilience and the future of logistics in your supply chains.
And finally, if you enjoyed the episode, please leave a rating and subscribe. And until next time, thanks for listening.